I would suggest there's certain moments in time that are truly transformative, right? You look at the Model T, right? Automobile totally changed the way in which we have transportation, right? You look at nuclear energy, totally, a game changer. You look at the internet, late 90s, totally changed the way we do business. I would suggest to you that we're in the midst of a change that's transformative that a lot of us don't even recognize is happening, right in front of us. And that's really this concept of artificial intelligence. So what is AI? And if I were to ask everybody in the room, I'm sure we would have a different answer, right? The term AI was coined back in the 50s. And then you looked at it was really conceptual. What we were talking about. It was John. What was John's name? John McAfee, I believe, or McCarthy, a computer scientist that actually coined this term. AI ranges all across the scale, right? So from autocomplete on your cell phone to autonomous vehicles, so it's a wide array of different technologies that you're seeing. And it's different than anything we've done thus far as technology. So you see here where we're talking about statistics-based math models. So not only the way in which this is developed, the way in which it computes, the compute that you need to actually run it, it's all different. Brand new skill set, extremely exciting. We're saying not classical math because we deal with relational databases all the time, right? Where you have primary and secondary keys, things that truly tie, that are absolute, right? Well, here, this is not an absolute. These are more, again, the relationships between objects or things. So when we talk about what is AI, that's really a loaded question, if you will. So we are definitely right here with respect to Mr. Clippy on the path, very much at the beginning stages, right? And that's what we're trying to illustrate here. Currently, all AI that's in production is known as narrow AI. And what that really means is that it's only capable of doing a very specific task, right? And what you're going to see, or what we're trying to get to, is this concept of AGI, right? And AGI is, think of it more of, okay, so now it's not a specific task. This is where machines would truly have cognitive ability that would be on par with humans, right? So you would be able to make these decisions. I say it would be able to make these decisions, right, without any human action, intervention, and it would be across a broad range of activities. So, when you look at use cases, this could be from healthcare to education to space exploration, all of those things, to where you would not need that human element, right? Now, when's this going to happen? Well, it depends on who you ask, right? With the current advancement in technology, there's a couple of things that really have to transpire. You would have to have not only advancement in the ability to compute, right? So Moore's law and all of that good stuff happening, but then the algorithmic aspect of it would have to accelerate as well. And if those two things came together, then potentially we could be here, right, at time frames. People say anywhere from 2030 to 2060, right? So people don't know, is my point. But it's here as far as the AI, the narrow AI, and it's not going anywhere. And so what we're going to do today, we're going to go through this. I'm going to give you some examples of what we're doing currently. We'll talk about some of the future states, and then we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions at the end. Really going to try and get through this presentation relatively quickly so we can concentrate on that. If you guys are like me and you can't wait till the end to answer a question or have a question, please interrupt me at any time. So when we're talking about AGI to ASI, now this is the superintelligence, right? And this is hard to even conceptualize, because at this point, theoretically, the machines would be smarter than we are, right? I mean, that's in essence what you're getting to. And in order to get here, there's this theory of it's a intelligence explosion. And in essence, that's where the AGI is capable of understanding its own programming and its own code and redefining it, right? Making it better and better and better to where you have this constant change, and it changes so rapidly that it's uncontrollable. And so it's hard, it's far-fetched, it's hard to wrap your mind around it, but that's really when you hear AI and you hear the different types, this is what people are referring to. ChatGPT. This is something that I think all of us are accustomed to, or I think. If you're not, you really should be. And what I mean by this is you look at these large language models, LLMs, that's what ChatGPT is. And this is, I think, a lot of people's first exposure into this field. And when you look at how quickly this is advancing, ChatGPT 3.5 was released in the fall of last year. Within 6 months, ChatGPT 4 was released. And you look at the capabilities, it's roughly tenfold, 10x. So that way is faster, vastly faster than what would be produced on the hardware side if you're looking at Moore's Law. And so to think that this is not going to be impactful would be an understatement. I would liken it to Excel, for instance, with accountants, in the early 90s. If you're not leveraging this, then you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage. So we're going to talk more about that. In fact, I'm going to have Jason talk to some of the use cases with respect to ChatGPT.
Hello. So ChatGPT, as Chris was talking about, is a large language model. Language models are trained on text, lots and lots of text. When they go through training, what they're supposed to do is find the relationships between words, billions, trillions of words from across the internet. They are looking at where they occur in sentences. What words are they close to? When you look at different sources, you see those same words close to another word. They start to build up those relationships between all of that. Small language models are things like autocomplete on your phone. So when you're typing a text message and it recommends the next word that you might be looking for, that's a relatively small language model. Large language models like ChatGPT are able to carry on entire conversations and sound as though they are coming from a person. When we put in a question to ChatGPT, so you have your box down here at the bottom with ChatGPT, and you come in and you type in a message, that's called a prompt. And so that's a word that we're all becoming accustomed to, is the word prompt. It's similar to the word query or a formula, but you're typing in a prompt. Things that ChatGPT can do, it can answer our questions. It can make images from just a written description. It can analyze images. That's where we personally find it to be really interesting. It can analyze both images, documents, and then it is excellent. Its bread and butter is doing things like writing stories, resumes, and memos. Over here, I have an example of the image that was on our cover slide. This is where I typed in my prompt, my question to it, and it created the image right there in the web app. That takes a lot of computing power behind the scenes to be able to do that.
So, Jason brought up the idea of prompts, right, and prompting. And this is a whole new field, meaning there are courses dedicated to just prompting, meaning that now, for instance, I don't have to be well-written to be well-written. I need to be well prompted to be well written, right? So very interesting concepts, right? And again, it's a paradigm shift with respect to tools that are available to us.
So one of the downsides to the way that these are trained and the way that they're created is that they can hallucinate. So a hallucination is where it makes up part of its answer. And it's similar to somebody trying to recount a story from a long time ago. And in your own brain, as you're going through, you may have gaps in what you remember, and your mind might trick you a little bit and fill in those gaps and replace what really happened with what you think was supposed to happen. AI, large language models, have a tendency to do that, especially the smaller ones. The hallucinations look real, though, because the model types it out in front of you super fast. And so you're thinking, well, that must be true, because wow, it didn't even have to think about that. It just told me that was exactly what it is. And they will look authoritative because, again, it's written right there in front of you. So we all have to be careful when we're using large language models that we double check them for accuracy, that we don't just blindly accept what they tell us as though it is truth.
So when we're looking at current uses, some of the uses of this technology you probably wouldn't even think of as it pertains to how we're using it today. Several applications that we use every day, it's embedded in here, and we have some future uses that we're going to go through. We talked about ChatGPT. Currently, in our shop, we're leveraging that for employees. Specifically, on Jason's side of the shop, with respect to development, there's some additional, outside of just ChatGPT, tools that we're using to assist with code and things of that nature. Jason, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, so a couple of months ago, we started looking into how to get licenses for the ChatGPT Model 4 system. So that one costs money. And the reason was I had been using it personally for several months and was just blown away by its ability to write code. It doesn't always get it exactly right, so you can't always just copy and paste the code that it provides you right into a system and have it run, without fault. Part of that is the hallucination problem, but it gives you ideas. It gets you going on things that you didn't know how to do previously. One of the biggest challenges with writing code prior to these large language models was that you learned a language. So you might learn a language like Java or Python or C or whatever it was that you learned. But you would go out and try to discover a way to do something new, but the people had written it in a different language, and you didn't know how to translate that to the language that you were familiar with. And I've experienced that many times, and that could take you a long time or never before you could ever make that work. With ChatGPT, I can take something written in one language, put it in there, and ask it, okay, I need to do this in another language. Tell me how to do it. And it will do a really, really good job of translating that to another language. That has really sped up some of our development efforts. It's helped us to overcome some problems that we've struggled with for years, of where I was like, I just can't get past this one hurdle. But with these large language models, they work amazing for code because it's text. And so we lucked out in the development world that what we do is text, and these systems have been trained on all of that text, and so they are excellent at coding. GitHub Copilot is an additional tool. They're actually both based on the large language model called GPT-4 that OpenAI made. That's what ChatGPT-4 is based on. GitHub Copilot is like a super duper autocomplete. So we're all used to an autocomplete in our text messages. You're typing and it suggests a word. GitHub Copilot suggests an entire function while we're writing code. So I can go in and start typing, the list of names sorted by first name. And by the time I've gotten halfway done just typing that word, it's already giving me in the autocomplete an entire function that it understands is going to do that for me. And I just hit tab, accept it, move on. It's amazing because it slows down all of that boilerplate code that we used to write. Every time we would go out to make an application, you want to sort by this? No problem. Let me type out the sorting function. It was always the same. This thing, GitHub Copilot, thinks ahead. It also helps us writing SQL queries. It's been amazing to be able to speed up development.
So you can see how these create great efficiencies in our shop, and you can imagine how it creates great efficiencies really across the board. With the license plate reading, I mean, you're training data, right? And these models, you hear the word training, and it's truly training. It's interesting because you have data that you would send to it to train, but now there's a term, I believe, synthetic training, to where you're actually having the AI generate the context that the AI is training on. So again, super cool stuff. The Mapillary is another application that we leverage with AI. Jason, do you want to explain Mapillary?
Yeah, so Mapillary is a system that's kind of like Google Street View. You can kind of make your own Google Street View. You take your camera, you mount it in your car, you drive around, it takes pictures, and then from that, you load those pictures up to this service called Mapillary. They were actually bought by Facebook about a year ago, and for the data. Facebook wanted the data, not the convenience. But so they will then do object detection in those images. And not only detection, they won't just tell you, hey, I found a stop sign. They'll tell you the latitude and longitude of where it is. And that's based on the latitude and longitude of where your camera was when the picture was taken. And then it uses the pixels on there to guess what the latitude longitude was of the stop sign that was over on this side of the picture versus the telephone pole that was over here on this side. So from that, we've been able to go out and do some surveys basically to be able to collect points and things like that.
So Jason was talking about object recognition. And so when we're talking about future uses, that's a big consideration. I really like that picture, by the way.
I had to think of the prompt for that picture, so that took a lot of thought on my part to get the prompt for that.
What we're seeing here is just a picture, right, of an intersection. And so we're asking to do analysis of the picture itself, right? And so it has to, again, conceptually understand not only from a written language aspect what's being requested, but how to analyze this particular picture. So in this, the prompt is, would you describe this as light, heavy, or medium traffic? And from the depiction, it's able to count the cars and give you an answer. And so when you're looking at this, you can think of things like, for instance, maybe you're doing this at an intersection and you're wanting to know more than just traffic. Maybe it's weather conditions. Maybe it's, you can think of all the additional use cases, but conceptually, it's the same. We've talked about text as far as natural language processing, but then we've also got the images and video as well. And so that's like the next step, right? And again, this is all from an NLP standpoint, natural language processing, to where I can just type something in a prompt and actually have this generated for me. Super cool. We're going to show several examples of this. You heard me talk about how now I don't necessarily need to be well written to be well written. Well, it's the same with brainstorming, where it might have taken several of us to get together, get in front of a whiteboard, spend the next hour and a half to come up with some concepts or some ideas. Well, not anymore. I just need ChatGPT and myself, and we've got this covered in 15 minutes. It's truly it's a paradigm shift, quite frankly, and not only the way we operate from a business aspect, but I think the way in which we learn as well. Jason, did you have anything you wanted to add on this slide?
No, sir.
So when we go into the future use, right, we're doing some POCs currently with respect to traffic intersections, for instance, that this is what those are doing, and meaning that what it's doing historically on a traffic intersection, you're going to program those, right, for specific task functions and all that. Here, with these POCs that we're doing, it's actually analyzing the traffic in real time to make decisions that are not dictated by any human interaction. Now, there's a traffic controller, right, in place that's going to ensure that all the lights aren't green at the same time. But my point is, when you have these types of technologies, you can see how efficient you can make things that are currently infrastructure in the field. It's a game changer. Other things that we're doing on the traffic side, for instance, we're sending a lot of data. All these new vehicles, they're relying on a lot of this traffic information. to make decisions with respect to knowing when the light's going to turn red or green, to optimize your fuel economy. Things that simple, but it's when you look at it across the board, they can make huge impacts. One of the initiatives that we have this year, I believe James and his department, we're going to implement a CityBot, and it's a chatbot, public-facing chatbot. And there's, again, when you're looking at customer interaction, there are a lot of aspects of AI that can improve the interaction with residents as it pertains to being able to get exactly what you're wanting. You've got 24-hour access, and what we're trying to do is create a scenario to where that information is curated to where you don't have to necessarily go through a whole bunch of documents or pages or whatnot to get to what you want, right? You're just going to type what you're looking for and have that information come back. And that's where we want to be. And in fact, we're going to show you an example of that here in a little while. Analysis, that's one of the big use cases. Jason, you want to talk about some of the efforts that we've got there?
So analysis for my staff a lot of times starts with having to go through a relational database, which looks like a Excel spreadsheet, and we'll have 20 tabs in our database, kind of like in a sheet, and we have to figure out how do we line. I mean, just to be able to answer a question of what was the employee turnover in the last 3 years, we have to first start with all of that raw data and try to figure out how to link it all together. But with a large language model, I can give it that data and then just ask it in English what I want. That is huge because it saves me time. And that's one of the big things that we're finding with all of these large language models and various AI systems is the amount of time that it is saving employees. It's a tool, just as Chris was talking about, it's a tool just like a spreadsheet was a tool that really made accountants' time go much faster because they could calculate a lot more things in the same amount of time. These AI tools are allowing us to do some of that with analysis now.
So what we see here on this next slide, and Jason, if you want to go ahead and give us some examples, and we're going to run some of these prompts over here just so you guys can see. So if I can get your attention on this side screen, but here, this would be an example of, hey, we need a policy written, right? And as many of you know, it can take quite a bit of time to come up with that initial revision. In this scenario, leveraging a tool like this, right, you get that initial draft as soon as you really hit your prompt in. Now, with that, obviously, there's a lot of consideration that has to go into play with respect to how do we leverage this responsibly? And you're going to hear that term over and over and over again, right? Responsibly. We're showing you a lot of the good stuff, right? There's another side that needs to be evaluated in order to ensure that we're doing this in a reliable manner. But this entire policy right now is being drafted right in front of us, and I guarantee you that it's going to be a much better draft policy for municipal government than I could have written or authored single-handedly. So when we're looking at and we're still going here. We're on number 4, implementation. I'm going to go to the next slide here, and that is image generation. This is something that if you haven't played with, I think you're going to find extremely powerful. And I think that some artists might find this as extremely offensive, quite frankly, because some of the creativity, efforts, if you will, I think are being... some of the creativity efforts, I guess, are not being as appreciative as they might have been in the past. And that's just my own personal opinion. But it is extremely a powerful tool to be able to create images quickly of really any type of concepts that you can think of. What did you prompt here? A Purple Martin cartoon bird telling the public to conserve water. So,
to have been here long enough to remember Willie Water, this is where I got that idea from.
Our next example here is video generation. And again, we keep pushing the envelope, right? here on the generation of video, this is something that the Sora product has the capability to do. It's not been released to the general public, but there are some examples. And this is, again, taken from the same type of prompting, right? So if you look at the prompt on this particular image, what does that read, Jason?
It says, several giant woolly mammoths approach treading through a snowy meadow. Their long woolly fur slightly blows in the wind as they walk. Snow-covered trees and dramatic something, something, something.
Again, that's all that was utilized to actually create this image. When you look at, in fact, when you look at some of the people in the images, there's one from the Gold Rush, or that's a movie trailer, for instance. None of these people are real. None of this is real, for that matter. And the ability to be able to generate these things, you don't need to be great in video editing. In fact, the only thing you need to be good at, again, is that prompting aspect that we're talking about. And so it's truly a new day from an aspect of, one, being able to believe what you see, right? Being able to rapidly produce information, whether that's video, text, or pictures. But it also presents a lot of challenges, right? It presents challenges from the standpoint of, if we're producing these things, they're city records, right? So we have the same responsibilities that we would with anything else that we produce. If we produce, or if we just put a chat bot out there that was a large language model that we have not trained, and it gives a response where we say all permits are free, well, there's some accountability there, right? And so, there's a lot of things that you have to think about when you look at the data that the models are trained on. Is it fair? Are there biases in that data that it's trained on? Because that will reflect in how these return answers. As he goes through some of these, and I've already started on some of the problems, you can imagine public trust. Now if I can't believe what I see, who do I believe, right? Jason talked about the hallucinations, and I've talked about some of the biases, but they're definitely present. What you see up here are some of the headlines, some of the AI headlines here of late. Can you read those, Jason, for the people that can't see?
So the top one is Air Canada held responsible for chatbot's hallucinations. So the chatbot gave a traveler the wrong airfare information and then sued when the company refused to give them a refund. And the next one, this one's about legal issues. So a popular AI chatbot's found to give error-ridden legal answers. That is notorious right now for hallucinations in these. And another one is Google's AI tool making offensive historical images. Google had a problem with that about 2 weeks ago, and they stopped their large language model from being able to produce images. They have recently turned it back on, but it will not produce images of people because they're still not confident in it being able to produce historically accurate pictures of people. So right now it will happily produce androids, which is why I have androids all over here, because it was willing to do that for me. And the next one is about Adobe Firefly is another image creation tool, and yet again it was producing images that people found offensive.
So where are we? What are our next steps? People are utilizing this technology right now. It's here to stay. And so again, how do we do it in a responsible manner? So one thing that we're doing is we're creating a steering committee, if you will, that's not only comprised of IT, because this is not just an IT function, right? We will have a membership from legal as well as HR, potentially James's shop, right, from a community outreach standpoint. We need to ensure that any of the data that we're leveraging, the integrity of the data itself is sound, right, to try and ensure that we don't have some of those biases. I would envision that very similar similar to how we do cybersecurity training, onboarding new employees. We'll perform a very similar training with respect to AI and the use cases and what's acceptable within the organization. We want to create guidance from that same steering committee as well as potentially directives, if you will. And when you look at how are we going to do this, there are certain things that need to be pillars, right? I talked about the integrity of the data, but also the reliability, the security of it, because a lot of what you're putting in there, these LLMs will become targets, if you will. Fairness. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to accomplish. And so that would be another pillar, if you will, as it pertains to how we're going to move forward. So with that, I've gotten through this presentation. So now we can do some of the cool stuff that we've got over here to show you. And with that, this machine here, this is not a giveaway, even though the mayor asked about it. The reason we brought it here is when I was telling you how all of this functions differently than in the past. This thing that looks like a shoebox here that says GeForce, right? That is actually a video card. And so traditionally, most of your processing on machines would happen, right, with the CPU and then the memory that's located locally. Well, now all of that's actually running on the GPU. And it's because, again, it's a different math. The math, it's much more like how you would mine cryptocurrency, if you will. And so the bus speeds, meaning the highway speed, if you will, that you can travel on these GPUs is far greater than anything that you're going to have locally on that motherboard, right? So again, the hardware changes, the way in which you compute changes, everything is different. All of that changes. Let me be quiet for a second and open it up to the audience to see what types of questions, and then we can go anywhere with this. We've got a couple of things keyed up for you guys, but I really wanted to try to see what piques your interest so we could focus the remaining time on that subject matter.
Chris, can I just jump in? Can you also talk about how it's important to keep things keep your research in AI segregated from the rest of our systems?
Yeah, so one thing that we're trying to do, and thank you for the question. You see this here, and we've invested. This is roughly about a $5,000 machine, right? And the reason that we did that is so we can run all of these tests locally, right? So we can start to try and do this in-house. Claire was talking about the security or the scrutiny. When you're using like ChatGPT 3.5, right? That's not something that we're going to recommend that we necessarily use for our organization because there is no privacy. There is no, when you're putting in your prompts, whatever you're searching or prompting, if you will, there's no expectation of privacy. So let's say that we had something confidential, or you were wanting to write something, or you were putting in city information into these LLMs, right? That potentially you could be violating some issues from a standpoint of confidentiality. And so here, if we're doing it locally, it gives us the autonomy to do a lot of things that are within our control. And again, we're trying to do things not only from a security standpoint, but also what makes sense from a financial aspect. Because when you start to use these LLMs in the cloud, there's a huge spend for this compute power that we're talking about. So, thank you. So what questions or comments might we have?
It's been so hard to not just blurt into your presentation. This is exciting stuff, and I agree. This is transformative. This isn't like Hadoop or even blockchain. Kind of hit the hype curve and came back down again. This is here to stay, and it's big stuff. I am excited to know that we're using this to augment coders and coding efforts versus just doom scrolling through Stack Overflow, a bunch of bad answers to finally get the answers you want. I am curious. Have we started looking at now the Copilot's available for desktop now? So as people are going out there thinking about a presentation or they're thinking about getting a job description, they can do this all within Copilot desktop. Have we started looking at that for general use in the city?
Yes, we have. And Copilot, for those that may not know, it's a Microsoft product, right? And so that is their AI client. We are a Microsoft shop from a standpoint of OS only, okay? And so we are a Google shop when it comes to email and docs and all that stuff. And so what we have been, and we've tested both. We've tested the Copilot, and we've also tested tested. Google's latest iteration is Gemini. And Gemini does a lot of the same features. In fact, Jason, I know you weren't ready, but can we bring Gemini up? Well, you're on a different screen. We can bring it up in a minute, or if you can bring it up now. But anyway, what that gives you the ability to do is exactly what you're saying, Councilman, where if I need to compose an email, or if I need an image in a PowerPoint presentation, or if I'm working on a document, or even better, one thing that I think is really cool is the ability to create spreadsheets just from, like, so for instance, let's say I wanted a spreadsheet of every, let's see, who do we have in? I've got a park fan back there of every native tree in Texas, right? It would actually create the template for me, and it would fill in all the native trees in Texas, right? And then, so my point is, that might have taken me an hour to research and produce, and it's right there with you. Now, have we rolled this out to all of our employees, Councilman? We have not. We've purchased just a handful of licenses so we can do the testing, because there is an additional spend, right? It's about a 20% additional cost to every license for each employee. But absolutely, we are planning on proceeding that in this budget year, sir. Any other questions?
So aside from coding, what's the low-hanging fruit?
I'm glad that you asked. In fact, what you're seeing right here, this is, if you guys, I don't know if you're aware of the, actually you are, because it was talked about last meeting. We created a new hotline for the city. Okay, well, I do not want to steal anybody's thunder, so I'm not even going to talk about the hotline. I'm going to talk about Rock Solid. We have an application called Rock Solid that you guys are familiar with, and this is where, as a resident, you would call in, right, or there's a couple of ways you can get the information in through the app or whatnot, to report an issue, whether that be a pothole, whether that be street lights or something of that nature. And we're trying to look at additional ways that we can funnel requests that are outside of that into the same application, right? But when we're talking about categorizing, right, most people think they know where to send it, but it doesn't always get routed to the right place off that initial response. And so what you're seeing right here, this is super cool. This is all of the information, I believe, is this the last 1,000 or 100 requests?
Yes, this one right here I just did for 100.
Okay, and this is real-time data. And this is data coming from our CRM, where we're actually using AI to read the description, right, of the complaint. And then Jason has trained it on all the departments and their various functions and what they do. And so it is actually depicting what department this should be routed to without any human intervention whatsoever. Jason, do you want to talk about how you were able to get this to function in this manner?
So dealing with free text fields used to be, like up until a year ago, the bane of analytics existence. So, people would take, they would have an application, and instead of typing into the field the number of widgets that they made, they would write a comment that said, "Today I made 5 widgets." But then somebody would say, "Hey, can you count up how many widgets were made today?" And I was like, "Well, they wrote it into that free text field. I don't have any way to do that." Up until a year ago, I didn't have a way to help solve that very well. AI and large language models specifically are really, really good at looking at free text fields and helping us to get information out of them. So currently on Rock Solid, when you go in there, one of the steps you have to do is pick the category that you believe your issue relates to. And what we would like to get to is to avoid that step, because it would be a lot more convenient if you could just type in your complaint and then we'll do the rest. We'll look at it and figure out where to route it. Up until a year ago, that would have required a person, a city staff member, looking at those requests and deciding which one to send it to. Now, we have the potential to allow an AI to route those requests. This is just an experiment. This is not in production. We're not actually doing this right now. But this is a test to see, can the open source large language models that we're running on this machine, can we fire it at all of these different requests and see in the blue here what department or division it thinks should be assigned to that complaint. So here somebody had said pothole in alley, and the AI, based on all of the descriptions I gave it of the city departments and divisions, picked streets maintenance. That's one of the categories that I gave it that it was allowed to choose from. So it's really good at the code enforcement, and things like that. This is, again, just a test. We are in the early experimentation phases of running something like a large language model on a system like this and having it go over real data. But I am very encouraged with these capabilities because it really will allow us to get into some of those free text things that used to be really difficult for us to help classify.
Thank you, sir.
Can I quick comment on this? One of the fallacies that I see when people go forth with this is the expectation this is going to be perfect. The goal is not perfect. The goal is better than status quo. So if we do 1,000 of these and 10 get misrouted versus 100 got misrouted by people, that's still a win. So it's not perfection. It's better than status quo. So that's exciting stuff. That's neat.
This one here in pink is not one of the categories I gave it. So that's what I was highlighting, and it's hard to see on the screen. But on here, the complaint was that there was graffiti on a pedestrian bridge. And the department it picked was graffiti on pedestrian bridge. Well, that's not obviously a department. That's an example of the hallucination happening there. And each one of these, we gave it one at a time. We didn't give it like the whole list and tell it to process. So this does give us a insight into how accurate it is, because it is firing blind on each of these, and occasionally will just give us the wrong thing. Sometimes what we find is that it will give an entire paragraph as an answer. Most of the time, it does pretty good and gives us the category that we told it, one of the ones we told it to pick from. But other times, we have seen where it will return an entire answer to somebody.
So what's interesting, Councilman Kelly, with your question or statement, and you're 100% right, and thank you for clarifying for the audience, there was about a 30% diff as far as what it was selecting and what individuals would select. And then what we found is that out of that 30% that was different, the majority were actually a better response from the AI than the actual applicant or person submitting it. Another use case, Mayor, as far as how we could use this outside of just development, is with documents and searching through documents. So this is, you can point this to a UNC path, right? So something on a file share or something of that nature. And so it'll look through all of the embedded documents. And so what we were playing with were just our policies and directives. And what was really cool, instead of me having to call HR and say, hey, Tad, where do I look in the policy for how long I have to wait until I can use sick time, with employees or something of that nature. I can just pose those questions, and it searches through all of those policies, and instantaneously it's going to come back, it's going to give me the answer, it's going to tell me what policy it's in. So that would be another efficiency, if you will, that we could leverage just right off the bat. And I think Jason's bringing that up as we speak. In fact, what he's having to do on this machine, remember I was telling you all that's running on the GPU. Well, as we load different LLMs, large language models, these open sources, he's actually loading new ones into the RAM to provide these functions. Everything wants to run on the actual GPU, graphics card, graphics processing unit itself. And what is now slow, where if you're familiar with computers, what you would do if you didn't have enough space for an application, you would page out to disk, right? And the disk was a slow storage. Well, guess what? Now, if there's not enough room to load that LLM on the GPU, you page out to RAM, and that's the slow memory, right? So what used to be fast is now slow, if you will. but I believe this is an example. So he poses the question, can I wear jeans? Right? And instead of searching through the dress policy and all that good stuff, it says, sure, I'd be happy to help. Based on the context information provided, it appears that you are looking for guidance on what attire is appropriate to wear for work at the City of Louisville. According to the policy statement, an administrative director provided appropriate business attire for work at the City of Louisville includes, and then it tells me the casual work attire, appropriate on dress down Friday, and it gives me the context. Now, there are some things, I asked just in playing or testing, I asked, how do I get fired? Well, it came back and it told me, you should not want to get fired, right? And it went through, but then it did tell me, that you can only get written up 3 times. And then it goes through the discipline, and it showed me insubordination would be a top way I could get fired and things of that nature. So conceptually, all kinds of use cases, but these are some of the examples that we're playing with. I'm really proud of our shop. I would suggest that a lot of IT shops are not doing what we're doing right now. And quite frankly, a lot of that's just due to Jason, his team, the skill set that we have on staff.